What the Gravedigger Saw. Many years ago, a gravedigger named Berhurdt lived in a lonely, wind-swept mountain village. As it was only a little hamlet, the gravedigger did not have work to do every day, and sometimes went to neighboring villages to dig graves when it became necessary. And on those days when Murdoch was happy working, others were sad because of a death. It seemed that when Murdoch smiled, others wept. Only during such mournful times did he earn his daily bread. On this day, he was especially happy about his work. The grave he had to dig was for a woman who had caused nothing but trouble for everyone around her. She had been mean and cruel all of her life. Not only people, but small animals too had suffered because of her cruelties. And it seemed to Murdoch not even the smallest, most helpless kitten had been safe from her cruel hands. And he couldn't forget that. So to make sure that she stayed in her grave, he decided to dig it extra deep. Before starting his work, he carefully placed a package on a nearby grave. "I mustn't forget this," he said to himself. "If I do, my wife will be furious." And he set to work. When he was finished, he left the cemetery to perform a similar job in a neighboring town 20 miles away. It was late afternoon before he started on the long trip back to his own village. The shadows grew long, and the chill night winds began to blow. He was almost home when he remembered the package that he had left in the cemetery early in the morning. Angry at himself for not having remembered to take it with him, he left. He made his way back to the little graveyard. It was dark, and the moon was hidden by clouds when Murdoch finally reached the cemetery gates. It was now nearly midnight, and he was tired, and he was annoyed. Being accustomed to cemeteries and graves, he wasn't afraid of anything but the tongue lashing he knew his wife would give him when he arrived home so late. Pushing the creaky iron gate open, he hurried through and made his way between the rows of tombstones and mounds. Luckily, he remembered exactly where he had left the package, and sure enough, there it was. Undisturbed and waiting for him to retrieve it. He had barely picked it up when he heard the crunch of carriage wheels on the gravel road and the pounding of horses' hooves. Murdoch whirled his face towards the road. Who would be coming at this hour? He wondered, fearfully. Louder and louder grew the sounds as the mysterious vehicle came closer. Then, in the dark, he made out the shape that approached. It was a hearse, or at least a carriage that looked very much like one. Though Murdoch was not a timid man, a sudden chill went down his spine, and he ducked behind a tree. And just in time, rumbling around the bend as if pursued by the devil himself, the carriage roared straight through the cemetery gates. The horses were jet black steeds with terrible glowing red eyes. Their manes flew about their heads, and blue sparks flew from their hooves, smote the ground as they came to a screeching halt. They stood there snorting and stomping and foaming at the mouth, and the doors of the carriage flew open. Murdoch could see two figures climb out, but all he could see of their faces were terrible, greenish yellow eyes. Terrified now beyond all measure, he dropped to the ground and peered through a clump of grass, watching in horror as they stalked noiselessly straight towards him and to the very grave he had dug that morning. Then they seemed to dip down and disappear into the earth. From his hiding place, Murdoch thought he could hear a scraping sound. Then suddenly he heard the most unearthly scream of his life. It made the blood run cold in his veins. It went on and on and on, rising and falling like the wind, echoing through the night like 1,000 demons or 1,000 souls in agony. Frozen with fear, he crouched there, expecting his own end to come at any moment. Then the two dark figures reappeared. This time there was a third figure, robed in white, struggling and withering in their grip. Desperately it tried to break away, sobbing, wailing, moaning, and crying. The wretched figure tried to break loose from its captors. In a flash, the three were down the path and alongside the hearse. There, the white-robed figure screamed again and wrenched loose for an instant. In that second, the moon rolled from behind the clouds, and Murdoch's heart stood still. There, standing by the dark hearse, was the cruel woman whose grave Murdoch had dug only that morning, and holding her in their claws were two giant black